Good evening. On behalf of TiE, I'd like to welcome you all to today's event. My name is Vinu Sen, and I'm the President-elect of TiE SouthCoast. We'd also like to welcome Dr. Gil Amelio. Gil, we're honored and privileged to have you here. I will request Naresh Soni in a few moments to introduce Gil, so I leave that to him. I just wanted to say a few words about TiE. TiE is the world's largest entrepreneurship organization. We have 61 chapters in 17 different countries, so we're truly international. Our origins were in the Bay Area, and there were a group of entrepreneurs, mostly of Indian origin, who started networking and helping each other as they started their businesses. We are all about fostering entrepreneurship and helping and mentoring like-minded entrepreneurs regardless of race, religion, or creed. So, you know, it's open to everybody, and, you know, we'd like to welcome everyone here. Entrepreneurship, from my perspective, it requires a lot of courage. It requires, at least in the early stage, it requires the ability to lean on other people and to get mental support, emotional support from others. And in TiE, we try and provide that, the mentorship, the support, trying to open windows, etc., doors, etc. I'd like to thank some of our sponsors today: Mission Ventures, Chawla Law Firm, Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, and Roth, and we've got Hayden Trubitt over here. Hayden, thank you for sponsoring us. I'd also like to thank Janssen Laboratories. They've given us this beautiful facility. And Diego, he was registered for this event, but he's not here. But I know Kathy is over here from Janssen, and perhaps there are people there too. Thank you. I would also like to welcome our charter members. These are members who've been successful entrepreneurs, professionals. They've started businesses, and they're over here to try and give back. So, you know, talk to some of them. I'm going to introduce some of them. Khurram Sheikh, he's the Senior Vice President of Power Technologies. He's here with us. Anil Kriplani is here. He's the President of Wirefree.com. There's Suren Dhutia, President of Dynametrics. Nikhil Varya, he's a professor at SDSU. Mitch Mutz, he's the CSO of Amplex Pharmaceuticals. Naresh Soni, who's VP of InterDigital. I hope I haven't missed anyone. Will charter members please stand up? Finally, before I hand it over to Naresh, I'd like to thank Preeti Purohit, because without Preeti's help, nothing. Naresh.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Naresh Soni. I'm Chief Technology Officer at InterDigital. InterDigital is a publicly traded company on NASDAQ, and we develop advanced wireless technologies. Today, I have the honor and distinction to introduce Dr. Gil Amelio, former Chairman and CEO of Apple Computers. During his 3 decades of technology and business leadership, Dr. Amelio has achieved a great number of business, scientific, and technological successes, including orchestrating the turnaround of a Fortune 500 company. And he's going to talk about that. He has the passion and love for technology. He started his career at AT&T Bell Labs, where he demonstrated the first charge-coupled device, which is the basis for today's scanners, camcorders, and digital cameras. He then moved on to Fairchild Semiconductors, where he continued to lead the development of charge-coupled devices. He was then asked to join Rockwell, where he led the turnaround of Rockwell Semiconductor division. Under Dr. Amelio's leadership, Rockwell, as we all know, became a leader in communications modem with a world market share of 80%. This is outstanding. After his successful tenure at Rockwell, he was asked to join National Semiconductor as a CEO. Dr. Amelio transformed the company from an unreliable third-tier chip producer into a respected front-runner in the whole of semiconductor industry as I know it. He also made significant contributions to the semiconductor industry as chairman and director of Semiconductor Industry Association. While at National in '94, he was summoned to join Apple's board of directors, and then as chairman and CEO of Apple. Back then, as we all know, Apple was going through several problems, including a shortage of cash and liquidity, low quality products, lack of a viable operating system strategy, undisciplined corporate culture, and fragmentation in trying to do too many things in too many directions. So during his tenure, Dr. Amelio cut cost, discontinued the older operating system project, and oversaw the development of Mac OS 8 and Rhapsody, which was called Mac OS 10. And that was the turning point for Apple, let me tell you, because I was on the other side and I knew what Apple was going through. Dr. Amelio was instrumental in bringing Steve Jobs back to Apple. That was an excellent move, and today, as we know Apple, I think, thanks to Dr. Amelio. He brought Steve Jobs from Next. Currently, Dr. Amelio is the lead board director at AT&T and my company, InterDigital. In addition to his activities as a board director, he's also by heart an entrepreneur and works with several startups and entrepreneurs as an advisor and mentor. On his educational background, Dr. Amelio did his bachelor's, master's, and PhD from Georgia Institute of Technology, and this is in record 7 years. Very short time. I don't think, today if you look at people doing PhD, it takes 6 to 7 years just doing PhD. He has written several books, such as An American Imperative, Profit from My Experience, and My 500 Days at Apple, which are a must-read. Dr. Amelio currently lives in Corona Del Mar with his beautiful wife, Charlene. Dr. Amelio is a personal friend of mine and my mentor. I'm amazed at the insights and some advice he has always offered me. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest, Dr. Gil Amelio.
So Naresh asked me to come and speak to TiE. And I said, well, what is TiE? He says, well, it's sort of an innovation organization. And, but I've come to understand that TiE stands for the Indus Entrepreneurs. I thought it stood for the Italian entrepreneurs. But I would have come and spoken anyway because Naresh is such a dear friend. I don't do this very often anymore. I was, for a while, I was on giving 30 speeches a year and events like this, so I sort of tailed off of that. And, but so bear with me if I stumble on through this a little bit. But I find that being able to share some of these ideas with you hopefully will be stimulating. And because the work I did in preparing this, I think, was really good. You know, one of the things that comes with age is your hearing is not always as good as it used to be. So when we get to the Q&A, please bear with me on that as well. Getting right down to it, if I read the material on TiE, and it also means talent, innovation, and enterprise, right? And I thought that was a good, but well, since we were trying to figure out what TiE was all about, I came up with my version of TiE. And my version is about technology, innovation, invention, and entrepreneurship. I added an extra I, sorry about that. But I thought it would be good. An invention can be defined as the creation of a product or introduction of a new process for the first time. Innovation, on the other hand, is an improvement over something that exists today, but is enhanced. And the way I like to describe it is that you do something to increase the value of what that product is. And that tends to be, where it's a significant, not a trivial improvement, but a significant improvement. And that tends to be innovation. And an entrepreneur is a person who organizes and operates a business, taking on greater than normal financial risk in doing so. And we all know people like that. They help the world around. I want to start with a historical perspective. Everyone is familiar with the meteoric rise of the United States. In a relatively short period of time, roughly 130 years, it went from being a startup country to being, oh, let me turn this on.
Yeah, this one.
There it goes. Can you hear me better? Okay,
Yes.
Sorry about that. In 130 years, we went from being a startup country to being an economic leader around the world. And the question comes up is, how did that happen? You know, I mean, there's been a lot of countries over the millennia. And how did something amazing like that happen? The first Americans were in some cases rejects of the British. They were people who wanted to get out. And in some cases, Britain wanted them to get out. Yet these same people built a society and a foundation for a country that was remarkable. What were some of the reasons for this? They emphasized freedom, equality, and rejection of classes. They granted private property rights, including intellectual property. What you knew became more important than who you knew. And they believed in limited government and low taxes. All of this unleashed an astonishing amount of human energy. Everyone has a little bit of an entrepreneur and an inventor. Everyone is. And what happened is that people said, well, I can develop this, and I can get to keep what I create. I get to maintain the value. I don't have to give it away to the tax or give it away to the monarch of the country, because there is no more. And people became very, very excited, and it was just this enormous entrepreneurial and innovative explosion that happened after that. Our founding fathers created the world's first egalitarian meritocracy. Now that sounds like a couple of fancy words, right? But it's really simple. What it means is everyone is equal, and you get ahead based on merit. Simple. Isn't that what you tell your kids? Isn't that what we all fundamentally believe? De Tocqueville wrote about who's a de Tocqueville, for those who don't know that history, is a Frenchman in the early 1800s who was amazed by what was happening in our continent here. And so he came and spent years studying our culture and our society and how we were doing. He died in 1859. So about the first half of the 1800s, he was doing this. And what he saw was democracy as an equation that balanced liberty and equality with a concern for the community as a whole. He also believed that self-interest properly understood helped to counterbalance the danger of tyranny of the majority. Because, as they said, you could take control of your own destiny without having to have aid from the government. That was the groundwork we had. Don't you long for the good old days? He also stated that in America, in contrast to the then aristocratic ethic of Europe, America was a society where hard work and money-making was the dominant ethic, where the common man enjoyed a level of dignity which was unprecedented, where commoners never deferred to elites, and where individualism and market capitalism had taken root to an extraordinary degree. That's a quote from de Tocqueville's writing. And so I think he captured it. In fact, he probably captured it almost better than anyone. He was a young man when he wrote this. He was about 30 years old when he did this research. So he was really quite ahead of his time. Another important character of that era is Adam Smith, who was among the first to grapple seriously with the basic questions of economic life. He also argued that individual self-interest held human society together. Smith argued that the inherent diversity of individuals' talents combined with the innate human desire to satisfy self-interest leads members in society to organize themselves in the things with which they do best. And so the freedom to do that was an important ingredient in building that society. So the bottom line is freedom works. I recommend we keep it. Another important ingredient was the rise of patent law. During the days when we were not the United States, but we were just the colonies, the 13 colonies, the way you got a patent was you went to the legislature of your whatever local group, or Maryland or whatever it was that you lived in, and you literally needed to get an act of the legislature to get a patent granted to you. The first patent was issued in 1641 to a man named Sam Winslow, and he was granted a patent for a new process for making salt. I think it's a little higher standard today. I am sure that it was pretty basic, but it was a start. It was a start. In 1646, a guy named Joseph Lanks got a patent for a speedier engine to sharpen edges, like blades and sights and things like that. But in this case, they said that the monopoly that he was granted with that patent was only good for 14 years. And so it began the idea that, yes, you can have a monopoly for a while, but sooner or later it becomes part of the public domain. The patent and copyright clause was proposed in 1787 by James Madison. Madison wrote, "The ability of the clause could scarcely be questioned. The copyright of authors has been solemnly adjudged to be a right of common law. The right to useful invention seems, with equal reason, to belong to the inventors. The public good fully coincides in both cases with the claims of the individual." So he was very, very firmly in that camp. So in 1790, they finally passed the first act establishing the patents, and they established a patent office. It really was a patent clerk in the beginning, and the patent clerk worked for three people in the government. Worked for the attorney, for the Secretary of State, worked for the Secretary of the Department of War, and worked for the Attorney General. Any two of those, if you got approval from any two of those people, you would be granted a patent. Among those first people, the first Secretary of State, when this was implemented, was Thomas Jefferson. And so one of his first duties in government was to approve patents, along with his colleagues. The first patent was granted in July 31st, 1790. The Congress had established the Patent Act in April of the same year, so this only took a few months to get there. Now, the earliest laws required that you have a working model in order to be able to get it. So you had to bring with you and show that it would work. And of course, all of that took time. So in 1793, 3 years later, the patents had patent applications that grown to an enormous number of 20. And the Secretary of State decided this was too much of a burden. And so patent applications were no longer examined. They eliminated examining. So if you wanted to get a patent after 1793, early after 1793, all you had to do was fill out a form describing the invention, clearly to the acceptably to the people who read it. There was no examination of what it did. And then you had to send a check for $30. Now, $30 then is about $1,000 today. And so that's, so boy, they were sure they forget about getting the money for it. The patent board, is this looking, can you just go off? The light's on. Maybe I'll use this one. Okay. I'll try and use this one. You want to have someone do this? Yeah. See if they can get it working. Got it all wired in. Here we go. Well, after all that work of wiring it up, I'm not sure it was worth it, but well, okay, I'll just deal with it. I'll leave it aside. You would think that these things would be easier to any event. So, with that, there, I'm sorry. There. They finally decided to have the clerk become a part of the Secretary of State. Now, when James Madison came into office, he decided that he wanted to do something a little more formal than that, and so he created a separate patent office within the Secretary of State, and established that in May of 1802. Today it's within the Department of Commerce. By the way, for the ladies in the crowd, the first woman to get a patent was 1809, and her name was Mary Dixon Keyes. So they actually didn't forget about the ladies even in those early days. All was not merry and happy, however. The same year, a Philadelphia court ruled that patent holders were in violation of public interest. It is those Philadelphia lawyers. Now you know what they do. The ruling, fortunately, was overturned very shortly thereafter, and everyone realized that that didn't make much sense. So I guess I would characterize those people in Philadelphia as the world's first complainers about patent trolls. In 1836, the patent law was revised again, and examination was added back, and by 1836 we'd grown to 700 patents per year. Okay, so that's finally in 1870 Congress passed an act giving the Commissioner of Patents the authority to draft rules and regulations for the Patent Office, and that basically is when that was relatively unchanged until very recently, in 2009, where we went from a system where it was first to invent to first to file. In addition, other changes that were made in 2009 were they limited damages to patent violations, and they provided patent defendants more methods for defense. You can't just keep those patent trolls down, I guess. Currently, you've got to write a formal application and submit it. The biggest problem today is that the system is too slow and it takes too long. We all live in wet time, right? If it typically takes 3 years, sometimes longer to get a patent. The whole world can change in 3 years, you know, in the world of technology. I feel like when my laptop is 3 years old, it's ancient. I get a new cell phone every year. You know, we have an issue. I actually met with the Secretary of Commerce and the then head of the Patent Office a few years ago in a meeting that was held at Broadcom. And I also visited them later on myself, subsequently. And the thing I emphasized to them was to speed up the system. So they did put measures in place where they tried to get patents issued in 1 year. Now, you can't always do it, but that's the new standard within the Patent Office. I guess the way I can sum all of this up is that we're all operating at web speed, but the barristers are still plodding along. So based on this groundwork and the momentum of the Enlightenment, as I said earlier, within 130 years, U.S. became the world's #1 economy. Why? What was it that made that happen? And the answer is productivity. Productivity is the ratio of production output to what is required to produce it. That is more value per unit of effort. And it's the one thing that is the single most important measure of the economics or the value or the wealth of a nation. The output of its people ultimately is what determines how wealthy you are. And so one of the important things we have to do is to drive for higher productivity. Beginning in the 19th century, let me just give you this example of how important that was. Beginning in the 19th century, the U.S. Productivity started out as 1 percentage point better than England, and Great Britain. Over a period of 100 years, and you integrate that 1% over all of those years, it completely changed the economic status of those countries. Just 1%. That's all it takes. And for most of the last century, then, we were the best in the world at improving productivity. Much of it through innovation and invention. Today, I think we're backsliding. I think first of all, I never hear anybody talk about productivity, except in business school. I don't hear a politician. Have you ever heard anyone say, well, we're going to grow our economy, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to pass laws that will help, you know, our workers be more productive. And you never hear anybody say that. There's certainly nothing that's been done about it. But let me tell you, if we keep backsliding, it could kill us. It is worse than the budget deficits. It's worse than the trade deficits, and it's worse than the fictitious fiscal cliff. Productivity of the population, as I said, is the only real measure of a nation's wealth. Politician, I can't, like I said, I can't remember the last time I saw a public figure literally talking about that, the importance of it. It's much more about the redistribution of whatever's been created. So if productivity is starting to decline, how do we get it back? How do we maintain our competitiveness so we don't suffer the fate that England did during that 100-year period? And they've got to pay attention to the following things. And this is getting back to my list of TiE. Technology, including nurturing investment, innovation, invention, and entrepreneurship. So Todd, that's what's going to save us if it's to be saved. And I came to the right place. This is the group to do that. We've all heard about, when people talk about economics, you hear about supply side economics or consumption side economics or voodoo economics. But the economics I like was a phrase that was recently coined by a friend of mine named Andy Kessler. Andy Kessler said he wanted I side economics. I stood for invention, innovation, and investment. And that was his argument. I kind of like that because what Andy touched on was exactly what is the important element that's been missing in our national debate. And we need to do that. So what are the challenges in making all this happen? One is awareness. Everyone wants economic growth, but our leaders don't have a clue about how to achieve it. Very candidly. Most of what you read is pure nonsense. And it would be nice if it wasn't so politicized, frankly. These things aren't hard to understand. But to do them right means you have to take out the power that a government gets over its people. And so it's a trade. Do we do it right or do we maintain control? And usually our politicians want to maintain control. I want everyone to be aware of productivity and its importance. And I speak about it frequently. I write about it. I gave a short talk on television not long ago about it. And I believe that it is critical. So awareness of the issue and the importance. Second is education. We have to get back to the core mission of aspiring to maximize human potential. That's what schools are for. To help our children grow up and be all they can be. To maximize human potential. When was the last time you heard a teacher talk about that? Well, they do in some charter schools, but I don't hear it very often in our public forums. Education at the K through 12 level is a disaster, and one person I know, a really very famous man, decided in his community he was going to set up a school for grades 1 through 6. It's in San Antonio, and the man is David Robinson. David Robinson is probably one of the greatest basketball players who ever played the game. He's also one of the greatest human beings who lived in there. He took his wealth and he invested it in the school, and he granted scholarships to kids to come to first grade and stay with the school. When those kids finish 6th grade, they can fluently speak not less than 3 languages. They score at the top of every chart in reading and mathematics. And more importantly, they feel like they've accomplished it. They feel good about themselves. They feel like, this is great. And that feeling is hard to create any other way than just by sheer achievement. And they're proud of those achievements. My hat's off to David for the work he's done there. Just don't try to play basketball. Now, universities are a little bit better. But frankly, the growth of research universities, and some of the teachers in the audience may disagree with this, are making college almost unemployable. If you believe that maximizing human potential is the mission, then what exactly is the research university role? I was a co-author on a book called An American Imperative, Higher Expectations for Higher Education, which came out in 1993. And we talked about this problem. Now, there's a lot of great things that come out of research universities. A lot of good research and some new insights into things and so forth. And okay, that maybe for the top 10% of our population they can go to that. But what about the other 90%? We spend so much money in those research universities that there just isn't enough left over to do everything else. So we need to get back to the fundamentals. I think as much as I adore places like MIT, Stanford, and my school, Georgia Tech, and many others, the fact is that most of them are too expensive to go to. And unless you have incredible, fortune to have a lot of them. But so how do you take the person who comes from a humble family and wants to achieve? Well, maybe they'll get a scholarship there, but maybe they won't. You want to make sure that those other schools can step in and fill that out. But I think it would be even better if more of the research universities put a little more of their effort into that mission of maximizing human potential, because I think it's really what's important for our nation. The third thing in helping us respond to the productivity challenge is openness. If I were Emperor of the United States, what I would do is I would say, we want to be the innovation leader of the world. Anyone from anywhere in the world who wants to come here and innovate and invent and build businesses, the door's open. You get an advanced degree in one of our universities, you'll get an automatic green card. We used to be like that. We used to do exactly that. What we're doing, and I think that's a tragic mistake. My personal opinion is that Silicon Valley would not have happened had we not had that policy at that time. When I was at Fairchild R&D, it was, by relatively small. It's hard to imagine, but Fairchild was like the second or third largest semiconductor industry in the country, and in 1971, its revenues were $190 million. That crazy? I mean, so it was a much smaller business back then. In our R&D facilities, which were, modest but I think good, was 39 different countries represented in that place. So people I interacted with every day came from 39 different countries. I think that was fabulous, and it led to some incredibly good work that we did right there on site. Some of the first N-channel MOS work was done there. The first science trying to really understand the interface between silicon dioxide and silicon. The seminal work was done there, and I can go on and on. The first cost-effective planar semiconductors were made in that lab. And I was privileged to lead an incredibly talented group of people who did that. I'm all for openness. I want people to come here, and I want them to stay here. And I think we should even throw a little money in the bucket to help make that happen. The fourth item is stability, both political and economic. I think that speaks for itself. If you're unstable, you cannot build a long-term innovation culture environment. And that means we've got to stop the practices which lead to instability, whether they're economic policies that are nonsensical, or whether fighting wars we shouldn't fight, or whatever. I would really love to see us focus on that. And the fifth reason is investment. The fifth method is investment. Like I said before, eyesight economics. Okay, well, if those are the things that are important, how do we implement that? What do you do to try to make that happen? And the answer is you create an ecosystem. Think of a rainforest. Think of the rainforest in Brazil. No one is in charge of a rainforest, but a healthy rainforest is an amazing innovator. More species exist there than one can even imagine, and new ones are constantly emerging, and the failed ones are constantly dying out. If you try to intervene, you almost always make things worse, because we can't predict which species will evolve and survive and which ones will wither and die. Second-guessing a rainforest is a bad idea, and so is second-guessing a capitalist economy. There was a wonderful book written by a dear friend of mine, Michael Rothschild, called Bionomics. Has anyone in here read the book? Not here. I'm going to strongly recommend it to you, because what he did, the book came out around in the early 90s. I think it was 93, but I may be off by a year or two. What he said was that in his book, he revealed powerful new insights by viewing the business through the lens of evolutionary biology. Okay, and so and the whole book is riddled with examples. He actually went and looked at an ecosystem and then say, okay, here's an economic thing that has some of the same characteristics, and he paralleled them. The result was that he could make predictions of how that economic model would evolve based on what he saw in the biological world. And the accuracy was uncanny. So yes, ecosystems is important. I mean, don't you do that with your kids at home. You create a home environment. You call it whatever you want, but it's an ecosystem. It's a system where you have expectations, you have responsibilities, but you also have love and caring. And those are the values that you want to instill in your children, are those things that you talk about constantly, and you celebrate and reward when they do good things and punish when they don't. That's what that's all about. Now, as recently as the 17th century, people thought that the world was unchanging and society was unchanging. Remember, this was sort of the end of a period of feudalism that went on for century after century. If you made shoes, your son made shoes, and his son made shoes, and the technology barely changed at all. But then something happened in the latter part of the 1700s, somewhere between 1750 and 1800. It was the beginning of the Enlightenment. We've all read about it in school. But it was vital and had an enormous impact. And of course, this was getting very close to the time where the United States, remember, the U.S., the colonies were established in the early 1600s, and the U.S. government, the United States, was formed near the end of the 1700s. So it was right at that period where the Enlightenment was going on. It was punctuated by two things. One is the viability of a steam engine. We don't think about the steam engine as being that revolutionary today because it's pretty antique technology. But in that day, a practical steam engine changed everything. It changed how we weaved clothes. It changed how we moved things around. It changed how we could pump water out of the ground. It changed everything. And by the way, the patent for the invention, I don't know if the patent was actually issued, it probably was, but the actual the first practical steam was 1769. The perspective on history of when that took place. So about not that many years before the Declaration of Independence, 1776, right? So it's pretty close by. So this is all sort of contemporaneous. 100 years later, less than 100 years later, Darwin published The Origin of the Species. And that was in 1859. And The Origin of the Species really laid out this model of, he didn't call it an ecosystem, but really what he was describing was how species evolve is based on the environment they are in. If you're a butterfly that's bright yellow against a black background, you're going to get eaten first. So what do? You change your color to match the color of the background. He went in and painstakingly analyzed this information and really came to the conclusion that that's how the species evolve. They respond to their environment. And that's why the rainforest is so good. So from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, like the natural world, the record shows that technological progress is not smooth and gradual, but sporadic and disjointed. And this is called punctuated equilibrium. Okay? We all look at these periods where things seem to be getting boring, and then all of a sudden, the internet comes along, or the transistor comes along, or something like that, and it changes, dramatically changes. This is, in fact, the normal way that ecosystems, biological ecosystems, and it's actually, in fact, the way we live. The punctuated equilibrium, however, of unexpected, erratic change across immense variety of technology is terribly frustrating to those who want to plan and control the economy. Like Sisyphus, they are eternally rolling a stone up a hill only to have it undone. And because they really don't understand what needs to be done. There's another important element in building our ecosystem, building our future of innovation and entrepreneurship, and that is we must become masters of change. There are only two alternatives. You drive change or change drives you. Those are the two issues. You're either an innovator or you're a victim. So you better learn how to manage change, indeed how to drive change. Now I talk about, in my book, Profit from Experience, I talk about this in some way, about how important it is to be leaders, great leaders, change things. They don't change them on a whim, though. They change them for the better, to create more value and more opportunity for everyone involved. And innovation itself is change, isn't it? I mean, you know, you have this thing here, and you add some new features to it. Now it's this much better thing. That's change, right? That is a positive change. So innovation is a positive change, and that's what you want to focus on. So let me talk a little bit about the key ingredients in being successful in innovating. What you really need to do is you need to divide this into two sections. One is innovation at the personal level, you, or a small group, your team. And then there's innovation at the organizational level. When I was running an organization like National Semiconductor with 33,000 people in it, you have to find ways to innovate in that as well. The current thinking on individual and small group innovation is through a process called design thinking. I'm not going to go into a long lecture on design thinking. You can look at it on the network. To me, it seems a very logical, simple set of steps. You define the current reality and the problem that you want to solve. You create and consider many options to do that. What if? What if we did this, or what if we did that? You refine the selected directions. Got to shorten the list somehow, so you throw out the stuff that are impractical or don't seem to make sense. You iterate this for a little while, and then you finally have something that hopefully works. You pick the winner and you execute. However, the important notion is that innovation is always linked to a positive outcome. So it has to be, it's positive change, and that's what I want you to keep in mind. Organizational levels. The most important thing in creating an organizational innovation at that level starts with really understanding the market. Your company really needs to understand this market. IBM was such a successful company in its early days because it understood its markets, frankly, better than anyone else. And that was very key. Everything else was secondary, but that was so important that that it really set the theme. Now, a lot of people have gotten good at that too, but when you look in the 1950s, that wasn't that common. You want to encourage new ideas and communications. You want to look for patterns. You want to reward people that point out the problems. Okay, so there's this thing. When I went to Rockwell, there was this strange culture that I had to change. This culture was you never reported bad news to your boss. My first week there, I called for a staff meeting, and I said, I want you guys to tell me everything. We started at 8 in the morning and went to 8. I never heard one problem. The company had lost money for 8 straight years, but there were no problems. So I was exasperated. What do you do? Well, finally, one fella down in the middle of the organization worked up his courage because he heard me lecture on this, and he came to see me and sort of trembling. He said, you know, I think we got a problem, and I want you to be aware of it. And he told me. And so I got our chief financial officer, and I said, write this man a check for $2,000 right now. Give it to him. Okay? And then we're going to write a story in the company newspaper about it. And we're going to take his picture. And we'll make sure everyone knows that he came and told me about a problem. And that now that we knew the problem was on the table, we could do something about it. But if you don't know what it is, you know, we can't do anything about it. And that started the change of the culture. It started slow, but gradually, if I have to point to one thing that made us go from a truly a failed company to one that set all sorts of records and virtually anything you want to measure, it was that fundamental change. It was the ability to be open about what are the things holding you back so you can remove those obstacles and move forward. And the same is true in any form of innovation. The next thing is you want to hire and cultivate talented people. And you want to make sure people are in their best jobs. And I, in my book, Improper Experience, I write about something called the Welch Matrix. And the name came from Jack Welch. And I'll tell you what happened. I had a great privilege when I was at a conference, and my wife was traveling with me, Charlene. And so they had broken up the dinner arrangements into small tables. So I wound up at a table with Charlene and me, Jack Welch, and Walter Wriston. I mean, this is like, okay, that's a home run, right? And we had the most phenomenal conversation that evening. I learned a lot. I think they even learned a little bit from me. I'll tell you about that part in a second. But what we decided was that you can take people and put them in 4 different categories. The results they achieve, based on one axis, the results they achieve. The other axis is their support for the culture or the corporate philosophy, the corporate belief, support of the values of the corporation. So it's sort of a soft thing where achievement is very, very good. And so then you have these boxes, and so someone who's good in both is up in this box over here, and someone who maybe doesn't perform too well is down here, but still on the good side. And then there's the guy who does neither, and you know what happens to them. And then there's the people who perform well but don't follow the culture of the company. They work at cross purposes with it, but somehow they manage to get results. So what do you do with each box? So now you've analyzed what do you do with each box? Well, the losers, you just get rid of them. Okay? And by doing this systematically, you cull the herd, and you get And maybe somewhere along the way they will learn what they need to learn. The people in the upper right hand, they're your superstars. Okay, you're going to nurture them, you're going to promote them, you're going to do everything you can to make them as productive as possible. And the guy down below them, the guy who really believes in the corporate philosophy, but just isn't getting, his department or his group isn't getting results. And what we concluded was that probably, in most cases, was a result of having him in the wrong job, or her in the wrong job. And that the smart thing to do was to move them, to understand what their competencies were, and move them to where they can be better served. So where their best skills could be applied. But then came the hard one. You got a guy here who's running a division that's making lots of money, but he's completely at cross purposes with your philosophy of your organization. What do? There was no one who believed in results more than Jack Welch, Neutron Jack. I mean, had to get results under you. But as a consequence of that discussion that evening, 2 weeks later, I picked up the Wall Street Journal and read a story. And the story was he had fired 3 of his senior executives. And those were the guys we were talking about. Jack Welch decided that the corporate philosophy, the corporate beliefs, the corporate culture was more important than results. No one in the world would have predicted Jack Welch from coming up there, but that's what he came. What I learned is a way to guide people into successful career tracks. So we all have had the unpleasant task of perhaps firing someone or dismissing someone. I had one example I want to give you because it's really important. This was a situation where this fellow just couldn't do his job. He was a very nice person. He had a family, his lovely wife, lovely children. He just couldn't do the job. And so I got to know him pretty well. I sort of knew what his strengths and weaknesses were. He was in a manufacturing job, but he was a little, soft around the edges. He wasn't this hard, we're going to get it out by 2 o'clock today, and we're going to roll over mountains to do it. He was much softer than that. And so he wasn't as successful. So I met with him and I fired him. But what I told him was, I said, my advice is that, one, I think you're a good guy. You don't fit here. You don't belong here. You're not in this kind of a company. Why don't you consider getting into human resources? Because I think you will do well. And then he left. Many years went by, 20 years went by, and I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm hosting a conference. President Bush, the first, asked me to throw a celebration for the 50th anniversary of the Savings Bonds program. And so I threw a great party, invited CEOs and movie stars, and I had Steve Allen as my MC. I mean, this was a really happening event, happened 2 blocks from the White House. And in all of that hectic, this fella comes up. His name was Dale. This fella Dale came up, and he says, "Hi, how you doing?" All right, what am I in for now? And he said, I wanted to say hello, but I also want to say something else. He said, "You did the best thing that anyone's ever done. And I want to thank you." And I said, "Well, what are you doing now?" Turns out he was head of human resources for Honeywell. He had gone from being a failure, but getting him in the right track, he became a huge success. How many people in your organizations might have a similar experience if you get them in the right job? So the most important thing I got from that discussion with Jack Welch, other than the shared knowledge about the Welch matrix, was how critical it is to make sure you've got people in the job that best suits their talent. It's the most important thing you can do. And it's real easy to look the other way and compromise, because you want the awkward feeling you've got to have when you go to talk to someone about, we got to change what you're doing. We got to move you. But that was critical. The next step, in organizational innovation is you have to allow failure. It's the way the world works. I mean, how many species of mankind existed before, you know, it came on us? We're still a failure, but we're better than the rest. I mean, if you think about it for a second, it is a trial, not total trial, but because there is a pattern to it. And those patterns are things you should look for. But fundamentally, if you don't allow your people to fail every now and then, you're never going to get real success. Because they're going to be too bashful about trying really hard things. And so, you know, if you've got a really good team that just couldn't pull it off, throw a party. Say, we gave it our best shot, we'll go do something else. And I think that's really cool. Other thing I would do is something I did at National Semiconductor, and that was teach the process of innovation and teach the process of management. What I realized when I had 2,000 managers at National, I soon quickly learned that the prior culture of the company was very much a, you know, top down, do what I tell you, don't ask questions. And so these people had no formal management training. So I got my friend Bob Miles out of Harvard, and we designed, and a few other people, we designed a 1-week training course for managers, which I opened and closed at the beginning and end of the week. And then I had a superstar set of teachers from literally all over the country come in and teach the program we had carefully designed. It was amazing, the difference. I cannot overstate the absolute dramatic change, meteoric change that took place. Remember, National Semiconductor had lost money had been in business for 24 years when I took over. They lost money for the prior 4. The accumulated profit of the company, and since its existence, was negative. Okay, and its stock price was down around $4. Okay, when I left, well, and then the market cap was $500 million. Okay, when I left, the market cap was $5 billion. Okay, and I did some common sense things. I gave focus. I gave better. But the most, in my sense, the most important things I did was teach them the innovation process, teach them their management, and allow them to make mistakes, but as long as they were square with me about having done that. Everyone makes mistakes. That's not the problem. There's no one, no human, that has ever lived life without making mistakes. We all make mistakes. That's not the secret of success. If you said as a goal of the organization, we don't make mistakes, you're going to fail. Okay? The secret is recognize the mistake early and fix it quickly. What kills companies, what drives companies into bankruptcy, is the cancer that goes on and on because no one steps up and does what they have to do. And that's and what I did was I killed projects that were failing and refocused on the important ones. I put really good people on the jobs. I hired a guy named Rich Beyer, who went on to become the CEO of Freescale, and probably read about him in the paper recently when he was part of selling that company. I taught him the semiconductor business, and we allowed these people to. And I demanded that they do this. Now, there was one exercise that we did that I want to take on. I know if I'm running too late, someone speak up, but I got a few more minutes yet. There's one exercise that we did that was really fun, especially with the engineering managers. Okay, what we did is we had to say, we want you to describe a vision for the future of your department. Okay, so well, everything's long. So. We need to have a session. Okay, so what I said is, however, there's a ground rule, and the ground rule is you can't use words, only pictures. Now, for left brain engineers, this is really a challenge, and they agonize them. But what happened was the most amazing things happened. And they came out with some of the most imaginative, creative things you've ever seen to describe their department. And after the class ended, I said, now I want you to take this picture of your tree, take it back to your office, post it on the wall, and we'll leave it there. And you know something? Everyone did that. So that'll be the reminder of what you can achieve when you push your mind. And that turned out to be you know, a great process that we put in place that made things change. And then finally, the last one, well, there's two last ones. One is you celebrate the successes you have, okay? So you want to make sure that when you have a success, you find a way to celebrate. Now, you don't have to go extravagant things, but you do something special. You want to punctuate the success, just like if your child does something good, you know, you want to treat them with something special. And but now the last one that's critical in the innovation process is accelerate the pace of change. It's not just good enough to change and change in a positive way, because that's the definition of innovation in my lecture here today. But you want to accelerate the pace of change. What I tell people is speed is life. It makes all the difference in the world. And if you've got to compromise, and I often, when I was an engineering manager, I often faced this problem. I could either spend a little less money, but it would take me longer to get the product out, or I could spend more money, I can get the product in earlier. It always the right decision was to spend a little more money to get the product in. It was always the right decision. It was never any other example. And yet, you know, the bean counters in the green shades, they're trying to pinch every penny you've got there. And I understand that. But, you know, there's a difference between spending and investing. I mean, we talk about it casually, but it truly is. Investing is something you do and expect a positive return. Spending is just spending. We cut spending, but we don't cut investment. I dramatically increased the capital budget for the company. Literally, when I walked into our plant in Malacca, Malaysia, we had, and I walked down the assembly line. Every machine, it seemed like, was different. Or maybe there's a couple of things, but every machine. I was like, how do you make anything if every machine is different? And they said, well, you know, they break down, and we have the guy come over to fix it, and we have to train people to work on this machine, and then we have to retrain them to work on that machine. I said, this is crazy. Why don't you just pick a vendor, a supplier, buy their machine, and make everything the same? Well, we can't get the capital investment to do it. So I said, I'll give you the capital investment. It was unbelievable. Simple change like that. Okay, now it turns out that plant wasn't all that expensive. That was, you know, millions, as opposed to tens of millions of dollars to do that. And the productivity of that plant went through the ceiling. And then the other thing I had was I was walking through our plant in Salt Lake City, and I stumbled and almost fell over, but caught myself. And there was a big tear in the carpet that I hadn't noticed, and I had tripped over. I said, that's dangerous. Why you got that here? Well, we can't get the budget to change the carpet. So I said, okay, we're going to clean this place up, and we did. So what I did was I went to our facilities department, and I said, okay, here's what I'm going to give you guys. I'm going to give you, every month, I'm going to give you $250,000. And I want you to use it to fix up our company. Not just in California, but wherever National Semiconductor happens to be. And I said, I want you to update me on what you're doing and how you're spending and so forth, but you have complete control of the project. You set your priorities and do what you need to do. It was, again, one of those great feelings. I got more compliments from our employees for doing that than on setting themselves. And because you want them to have a certain amount of pride in what they do. Getting back to this point, though, is speed is life. Please remember that faster is always better than slow. Now, what about entrepreneurship? I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on it, and then I want to wrap up with a couple of other things. First of all, it was a study to decide whether you could teach entrepreneurs how to be entrepreneurs. And the answer is basically no. It's something that you learn by doing it. There are a few, background knowledge, some background knowledge you need, but that doesn't guarantee you to be successful as an entrepreneur. You know your markets, finance, et cetera. Your competitors. I'm not going to walk through the list of this thing, but frankly, that is a hard one, and I don't see a simple answer to teaching how to be an entrepreneur. The best advice I can give you is go look at what other people have done right and what other people have done wrong, and then make your own decisions as to what steps you need to take. But again, the one I continue to always emphasize is faster is better than slower. If you're going to make a mistake, let's find it out fast and get it behind us. Dragging out is really bad. The only other, I guess I can give you one other piece of advice, and that is, and whatever it is you're planning to become an entrepreneur in, whatever field that is or market that is, you need to totally immerse yourself in it. You need to know about everything that's going on in that business, the technology, the markets, the competitors, the global policies, the tax policies, everything about it. You need to get total knowledge. If you totally immerse yourself in that, you have a shot at being a really good entrepreneur. But if you do less than that, you're going to make mistakes. Now, when I was a venture capitalist, I had to learn on the job how to do this. I wasn't trained. I don't have an MBA. I've got a PhD in physics. What do I know about investment? So I had to come up with a way that would help me decide what was a good investment and what was a bad investment. And so, I'm going to tell you what the list is. I asked myself 3 questions, and it's only 10 words. It's three questions, but only 10 words in total. This is the most important advice I'm giving you. Listen to what I say if you're an entrepreneur and an innovator. Every entrepreneur, every investor, whether they say it or not, fundamentally asks themselves 3 questions. If they don't get a positive answer to these 3 questions, they will not invest. Okay? The first question, is it real? Second question, can you win? Third question, is it worth it? That's it. That's my list, 10 words. You get those right. If you're offering a business plan to a VC, and those things are compellingly and convincingly demonstrated, you win. And it is just, I don't want to make it sound simple, because if you start digging into the meaning of those words and the way I frame them, you find that there's a lot of stuff in there. Can you win? What does that tell you? Well, I better know about my competitors, and I better know about, what policies my state might have that might inhibit my ability to do things, or whatever. There's a lot of stuff under the surface of those 3 questions. And I always demanded that after they made their introductory presentation, if it was worth seeing a second time, they had to come back with those questions answered before I would make an investment. And then if they did, I would make that investment. I want you to make sure that you remember this. And I can get this to Naresh if you haven't had a chance to write it down and get it out there. Okay. There's one more topic I want to touch that is sort of at the outer edge of innovation, and that's what I call breakthroughs. You know what a breakthrough is. One I mentioned earlier was the invention of the transistor. Now, when I was at Bell Labs, Dr. William Shockley decided he was going to teach a course in advanced semiconductor, so I signed up for it. And I got to be very friendly with him. And in fact, he got to be very fond of me. We literally stayed close until the day he died. I was 26 years old. So one day, Dr. Shockley came to me, and he says, here's my patent notebook. He said, I've just written down a new invention in my patent notebook, and I want you to countersign it. Okay? I didn't know what to do. So I said, may I take your book home tonight and study it? He said, yes. He gave me his patent notebook, probably one of the most famous patent notebooks ever, and I took it home. And I studied what he'd written. He made a mistake. What he was describing would not work. Now I was really in trouble. Because how do you, a 26-year-old, right behind your kid, go in and tell a Nobel laureate that he got it wrong? So I didn't sleep well. But I finally figured out what to do. And I went into his office, and he always called me Gil. Right? Most people do. So he said, how you doing, Gil? And I said, oh, I'm doing great. Dr. Sharkman, I haven't signed your book yet. I have a few questions. And I framed the questions in exactly the right way to point him to where the mistake was. And he started to answer, and then he stopped. And he sort of the wheels were turning. And he had a little smile. He reached out, shook my hand, and he said, thank you, doctor. Dodged a bullet on that one. But what a great experience. I tell you, I had the privilege to work with in cooperation with those folks was really quite amazing. And lastly, I want to do one other thing, and that is I want to give you 4 things in the category of breakthroughs that the world needs. Okay, I'm going to talk about my 4 favorite things that I want one of you guys to invent. I'll help you if we can, and they're as follows. A little background. I spent most of my career in the semiconductor industry, although of course I did other things. In the semiconductor business, we deal with electronics, right? But the discipline is called electromagnetism. Electromagnetism, like magnetic waves. What happened to the magnet? The answer is no one that I know of does anything with magnetics in semiconductors. Now, I'm not just saying that that's necessarily precisely what you do, but here's what I am saying, is that one of the properties of magnetism is that it doesn't have the particle, doesn't have a pulse, so the loop has to close. Okay, and that means for conservation of energy purposes, you can actually, in the magnetic domain, make devices that can basically be lossless as far as energy is concerned. So now, how do you obtain this to happen? Well, I had an idea on how to do it. I actually built some trials. They were mixed results, but some of the better ones actually were significantly better than existing, and I'm still working on it a little bit. But the idea is this: if all of you who remember, impedance, right? You learned the complex impedance, right? You had the axis, you had the imaginary scale, and you had the real scale. All your losses in the real scale, you have no energy loss in this scale. Can you find a way to operate totally in the vertical as opposed to the horizontal? Well, you can't get rid of all of it, but you can do a lot better job than you've done. The worst things in the world are power supplies. When you go to buy a power supply, someone will advertise it as 84% or 94% or something like that. Don't believe it. That is a marketing breakthrough. What they did was they defined it in a way which made their product look the best that they could legally report. The real efficiency of a power supply in your desktop computer is probably about 30%. 70% turns into heat. You all know that, right? When you have your computer on your time. One of my test devices, I put 1,200 watts through it, and I could put my hand on it. Now, it's been hard to reproduce. I know I'm missing something. I got something accidentally right, but I don't know the answer. Let's go find a way to improve, really improve energy conservation. Because if you look, just take a look at the grid in the United States, to get to another example. Do you realize if you could move current and electrons through the grid in a lossless way, how much power you would recount? The grid is less than 50% efficient. More than 50% of the grid, about 53% of the grid, best numbers I know, is wasted. So that means you have to generate, let's call it 2 to 1. You have to generate 2,000 watts to get 1,000 watts to the customer. It's an incredible waste. And I can go on and on with the power supplies of your computer and so forth. I think there's an opportunity. The next one that I've spent some time thinking about is adaptive computing. Now, adaptive computing is, suppose I could, let me just give you an example. If I have a Pentium and I want to add 10 floating point numbers, I will tell you now, take my word for it, it takes about 400 cycles to do that arithmetic, okay? If I have an adaptive computer, on stage 1, on the first cycle, I set up a 10 input adder. On the second cycle, I get the answer. Wait a minute, adaptive things are supposed to be slower than hardwired things. That is, how many times have you heard it? It is common wisdom is that adaptive things are always going to be worse than hardwired things. And it ain't true. It is simply not true. People just haven't really thought about how to use adaptive technology in the right way. I have been waiting for someone to come through with a breakthrough on this, and I haven't seen it yet. The next exciting thing, and this one I haven't worked on, but I have investigated it, is graphene. Who knows what graphene is? Okay, hey, we've got some fans here. Where do you think graphene, and may not be graphene, or maybe something similar to graphene, but the point is, it's a set of, it's just carbon atoms, but they are arranged, but if arranged in exactly the right way, you get a zero resistant tunnel through them. And you can create electronic switches that are 100 to 1,000 times faster than silicon. And IBM has actually demonstrated that in their laboratories at their facilities in New York. I think this material has got a great future, or some variation. There's something going on in there that we need to understand that. No one quite knows 100%. I mean, no one has written the equations for how that does that. Yeah. It's kind of empirical at this point, but there's a lot of work going into it by cutting-edge research facilities. I suggest we keep an eye on it. There may be an opportunity somewhere along the way. And then finally, the last one, since I am on the board of Ma Bell, I have to mention this one. Please find a way to stuff more stuff in the mobile spectrum. And there are ways around Shannon's law. Start with that as the premise. There is a way. I may not know it, but there is a way. And try to find a way to get more spectrum, because ultimately, we love this idea of being untethered to the world, of having our television, video, everything coming to us wirelessly. We're going to run out of this stuff. And the only alternative is going to cost much, much more. That is microcells, very small cells where you space divide everything up much more. I think there are opportunities to do some exciting work in enhancing the ability to stuff more stuff in the mobile spectrum. I thought there's one more thing I want to mention. Remember I was talking about picking the right people? I wanted to write, added this at the end of my notes, but I do want to add it since I spent time talking about it. If you read my book, you'll find that I articulate the criteria I used whenever I hired somebody. Whenever I didn't follow my own rules, I regretted it. So here goes. 6 things. 1, strong personal and ethical qualities. That's always number 1. If you don't have that, don't go for it. I don't care how smart they are or anything else they've done. If they are not strong, personal, high integrity, highly ethical people, don't go to step 2. Step 2 is brightness, smart. Smart people may not know your field, but they will learn it, and they'll learn it fast. 3rd is experience, because I think brightness is more important than experience, but not always, but often is. The 4th is a sense of humor. You want people to sense, this is high stress work sometimes. You're meeting deadlines, you've got to crunch, you've got to be able to laugh about it. And I find that people who can laugh about it and make jokes tolerate the pressure a lot better than the people who don't. You have to have, number 5 is ability to work hard, and number 6 is intuition. You can't teach that. But people have good hunches about it. So you just sort of, I don't know how they came up with it, but they kind of know what to do next. Use that checklist when next time you hire somebody. Grade them on it. And you'll be glad you did, because it will be successful. Now, lastly, the thing I'm going to say is don't worry about making mistakes. Everyone is making mistakes, as I said earlier. And I'm going to give you a few examples. Quote, the worldwide potential market for copy machines is 5,000 at most. Who said that to the founders of Xerox? The management of IBM. Boy, they screwed up. Number 2. Fooling around with alternating current is just a waste of time. Nobody will use it ever. Who said that? Edison. Edison said that because he liked to ridicule Westinghouse. Westinghouse was right. So even Edison. And then one I so like. There is practically no chance communications space satellites will be used to provide better telephone, telegraph, television, or radio service inside the United States. That was said in 1961 by the FCC Commissioner. AT&T launched a satellite, Telstar, in 1965. It actually started to build it in 1962. The guy was totally clueless. So I guess in keeping, someone might ask, well, what's different about the 21st century and when it comes to innovation and entrepreneurship and invention? And there really aren't differences. There are only timeless truths. I try to share some of them with you, and I hope that I've given a little insight to you. Thank you so much.
Anyone has questions for Dr. Amelio? Please.
Dr. Gil, you mentioned everybody makes mistakes, so what was your biggest mistake and what did you learn from that?
Is that a trick question? I'll give you a couple of them. Generically, I allowed myself too often to be, when I was not as the CEO, but as a middle manager, intimidated too often by my managers who were giving me, without knowing it, bad advice. I should have pushed back more than I did as I was going. I finally, grew out of that, but that meant I spent a lot of time on failed projects early on, and that is not a good thing. The one everyone asks me about is hiring Steve Jobs. That wasn't a mistake. I did it with full knowledge of what the outcome was going to be. You had to be there. I can't describe it. You just had to be there. There was a certain culture at Apple that you pick up when you go there, and if you're the CEO, you are. It's sort of indescribable, but it is totally unique. And it was a shadow of Steve Jobs. And even after Steve Jobs had been gone for 10 years, it had changed. He was an amazing guy. He was also a cruel guy in a lot of ways. But he was a genius in what he did. When he spent a lot of time thinking about the way how you interface with things, that was his story. What people will enjoy working with, what they won't like. I never knew him to be wrong in making those things. He spent 3 months figuring out what the shape of the cursor on the Mac was going to be. How do you tilt it? What should it be? How about black? Different color. What? He agonized over all of it. Months. He finally said, this is what our cursor is going to be. I don't think that was my biggest mistake. My biggest mistake was selling the stock too early.
Contrast Apple with what was in Bell Labs in the heyday.
I'm sorry, say
if you could sort of contrast what you just said about, Apple to what Bell Labs was, and you were at Bell Labs early on, and the whole approach, because we've lost it.
It's totally different. I mean, everyone at Bell Labs was an author and an inventor. We were encouraged to write papers. We were encouraged to speak at the licensee meeting that was held annually. You helped your colleagues. It didn't matter if you were talking to a gentleman 2 levels higher than you, or you when dealing with technology. You all were treated with mutual respect. It was. I'll tell you a quick story that you'll get a chuckle over. My first day of work at Bell Labs, I was 25 years old. It was 1968, and I went in, reported to work, and they said, "Well, you got to fill out all these forms and stuff." We did that, and before you know it, it's lunchtime. So they said, "Look," my boss said, "Look, there's some of the guys would like to meet you, and we've arranged to have a table in the lunchroom." So we went in there, and everyone was very nice, and then the technical discussion started. And in about 10 seconds, I had no idea what they were talking about. And the longer it went on, the more panicky I got. And the sweat is now coming down. And I hate to think what my face looked like. And just about the time I was ready to break out crying, everyone started laughing. It was a hazing ceremony. They didn't know what they were talking about either. That was Bell Labs, the world's greatest collection of geeks ever. Totally different culture. And Apple, under Steve had the last decision on it. Period. That was it. There was no exception. I didn't run my companies that way, and I don't think that unless you're Steve Jobs, most people can't do that. Yeah.
What was the first?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Maybe
Well,
I go ahead.
Whoever's got the mic.
I have the mic, so I think I can.
Oh, yeah, oh, there you are.
So, two questions. One is the life cycle of a industrialized society and over the hundreds of years of changes in the society where an industrial empire went downhill. And when you look at role of innovation in that area and the things that came in and wiped it out, how would you rate our current status? And how would you rate the current society?
Current what?
Current America's
US
US current industry status.
Currency?
Industry.
Status.
Industry status. So that's one. And number two, we talked about productivity improvement. However, what's the role of continuity of a long-term solution? An example, Japanese society, industry. What's the role of that in the current American society?
Well, let me start there. I think actually Japan and us are becoming more alike all the time. I think I don't see that big a difference that I did. In 1974, I went to Japan to represent Fairchild with Toshiba. That was a dramatic difference in the cultures and the way they did things. They are still not as open and expressive as Americans tend to be, but they have all the same issues. I don't see any difference. And sometimes the managers get, full of themselves and overpromise and underdeliver. So I don't see that. When you talk about the U.S. data, you mean economic data?
No, US status.
Oh, status. Relative to what?
Relative to where we're going, given current financial crisis,
Okay.
our
Okay,
investment in
got it.
research and innovation.
Okay, got it. All right, first of all, the bad news is that we are growing slower than we ever have for a sustained period of time, except for maybe the time right before the Second War. The good news is everybody else is worse off than we are. Now that does not make me happy, but what it does say is that the U.S. will be able to continue to be the global economic leader, even though it is way underperforming the potential that we can perform. Frankly, I think we have several more years before we're going to really get at the underlying reasons for our underperformance and fix it. There's this, there's this belief, and that I fundamentally don't share, that if I take my money and I send it to Washington and then they give me 75% of it back and they keep 25%, that's a good deal. And it isn't. What they've done is they have reduced my productivity by 25%. And that is not a good situation. I think what we have to realize is that, and I can actually, show you this mathematically, but when a dollar goes through society, okay, there is, how many times does it get taxed? Okay, so if a dollar is floating around in the capitalist markets, in companies and businesses and so on, how many times does it get taxed? It turns out that number varies depending on what professors you talk to, between 6 and 9 times. Okay, so if I have a dollar and I get to tax it 6 or 9 times, so long as the tax is more than 10%, I'm going to have a positive return on investment. Okay, do the same analysis for government investment, and I hate when they use the word investment, it's pure spending. The answer is less than 0.1%. 0.1. The return of that is 90% of every dollar spent in government and 10% creates value. And this wasn't me saying that. This is a university study that came up with this data. So, where would you rather put your money? I'd rather put it in the free market. I'd rather have brilliant people, entrepreneurs, people who get up early and work late and do everything to make us better. I really don't believe that anyone sitting in Washington, D.C. has a clue about what the people in San Diego need. And get back to the ecosystem model. You got to believe in the ecosystem. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you mentioned the book on the bionomics, right? You use the ecosystem, the real forest, as an analogy to an environment that the startup activities can take place, right? So I know as a startup community, San Diego could never become a Silicon Valley like the Bay Area, right? So what do you see, like, and you mentioned like expectation, responsibility, and we also need a caring, nurturing environment for us to grow as an entrepreneur environment. But we have, like, say, Qualcomm, we have a lot of big corporations in town, but we also have a very vibrant entrepreneurial community. How do you see that ecosystem? Like, how do you see these different partners work together? Like, you know, what's the advantage of us being a geographical area, and what's the disadvantage? Be it like in general or industry specific. What's lacking, and what can we do better? Because I mean, like, say for example, I can give you an example. Qualcomm can publish a news release and saying like, well, we're investing in a mobile app company, and that could totally like take the industry to a different direction, right? Where the reality might be there's more worthwhile things for us to do as entrepreneur real community, right? You know what I mean, right? So because I see big corporations can oftentimes leverage that influence, and that can really how do I say suffocate the growth in the entrepreneurial community.
I'm not sure I'm going to get this exactly right. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. Most of the truly great work happens in small groups in businesses, okay? Where you can actually have a visual and audible connection to that person. That's why when you do startups, you try to put them all in you get a large room with no walls on it, and put everyone there so they can all interact. You try to get cross disciplines together and so forth. That's where the best creativity happens. Now you can artificially structure that in a larger company if you want to, but I don't see too many companies have really done that well, with the possible exception of Apple. Most companies have not done as brilliant as Qualcomm is, and I think it's an amazing company. Sooner or later, it gets to be a GDP company. It's not there yet, but ultimately that's where it's going to be because it has a responsibility to the customers it's created. And ultimately, that will take a precedence over innovation. And so the priority and the attention paid to innovation is going to go down, and dealing with the economics and the customers is going to go up. It's inevitable. It just happens. So it's not that they're bad. It's just that it takes an extraordinary effort to maintain that innovation ability within a large company. It can be done, but I don't see very many people doing it. So what I like is the small groups that get together and make great things happen. Change the world. If you change the world, I'd rather do it in small groups.
Real quick, I just have a curiosity question. And that was, what did the first female that got the patent, what did she patent?
The source I got from that didn't say. and I was thought of the same question, but I just didn't have time to keep researching it.
Oh, shoot.
So
Okay.
maybe I'll find out when I get tomorrow.
Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Who's next?
Yeah.
He decided it was me. How do you tell the difference between a human being who makes a forgivable mistake and an underachiever?
You can't give me a formula. You know it when you see it. I mean, that's just that you know it when you see it. There are people who are smart but lazy, and they try to take shortcuts. and they will cost you if they do that. I find the people that are ready to step up to their mistakes and correct them quickly and come clean with them are the guys I'd rather have any time over the pompous guys who say, well, you know, circumstances beyond my control cause this to fail. And you know it when you see it. That's the only answer I can give you. Someone back here had a question.
Look, just the patent was about weaving straw and silk.
Weaving what?
Weaving silk.
Yes, you started your speech, Dr. Newell. It was wonderful, but you started with talking about freedom. And I think that was very interesting because I think freedom is really the foundation for capitalism, and that's what led to this tremendous growth in America. So I have a father who lives in India. And when he comes to US, and he comes a lot, stays here for a long time, he calls the United States the biggest communist country in the world. And it's funny, when I was born, we were fighting communism and capitalism, and then one side wants. A lot of democracies are in the world now. What I wanted to ask you was that if you look 20, 30 years from today, so my father's opinion about why India is more free than the United States is that you can get away by not paying taxes. You can bribe to get things done that are important. And so fundamentally, an entrepreneur has a lot of freedom to do what's important. And, you know, I think there is a lot of truth to why that progress happened, because the government didn't interfere a lot. There are different sides to the story. So as you look to the world, and as you look at all these democracies evolving, I mean, China is another example where people talk about very fast growth. Which country do you think is best suited to really drive freedom so that the best productivity in capitalism would evolve?
I mean, what you said a word I missed.
Which country do you think among...
Which country?
Yes.
Well, you know, if you look at some of the recent data, you get surprising answers to that. But let me just back up on your fundamental question. If America is not the largest country in the world, we don't have the biggest population. Okay, what we've done is we've had a lot of momentum because of a good start, and because, frankly, all of our competitors, including India and China, for much of that history of our country, were still basically feudal societies, and so they didn't represent any real competition. You flash forward 30 or 40 years, all of those people are going to have moved up. They're going to have well-educated people. Their banking systems are going to be sophisticated. Their trade laws are going to be cleaned up. Their intellectual property laws will ultimately be cleaned up. How do we win in a situation like that? I mean, when you've got all of those people, how do you win? And you win only if, in one way, and this is the way I mentioned in the beginning, and that is you say, all you innovators in the world, come to the U.S. We'll keep you, we'll educate you, we'll support you, and we'll let you do your magic. I really think that we have to get back to this notion of being the world's leading innovator. Now, we have been. When you look at all, it's amazing, right? We talked about the transistor, we talked about the computer, we talked about aviation, we talked about, all of that stuff. But if we don't keep promoting innovation and entrepreneurship, we're in a lot of trouble. And right now, I see higher priority placed on distributing income to people who are not going to invent tomorrow, and away from the people who will invent tomorrow, but maybe for some other country. And I think the only way we're going to keep it up is we've got to reopen the ability for us to be innovative and achieve productivity. So there's no other way. Now, who's going to do that? I don't know. I just hope and pray that whoever our leaders are in the coming years really finally get an understanding of this problem. There's certainly been enough written on it. It's not like people don't understand this. I mean, there's enormous works intellectual property, intellectual works, writings, and everything. They've described this in great detail. It's just unpolitical. That's the problem. The politicians want to have a certain amount of control over their voters. They want to motivate you to vote for them. They do that by either controlling you or by buying you. And that both of those are at odds with having a true entrepreneurial culture. So I hope someday we have a great leader who comes forward and can get us back on the right track. Now, if I look at other countries, I'm sort of amazed at how well Hong Kong is doing. It's not a big country. I mean, although it's part of China, but they do measure the economy of Hong Kong separately from the rest of China. It's amazing. They're continue to be phenomenal achievers. I would keep my eye on places like Vietnam for the long-term future, not immediately, as a source of long-term innovation. Wherever you, again, I'd also say there are some countries in Latin America who would probably also fall in the most prominently Brazil. They seem to really be getting their act together. Now, they still have a lot of economic issues they got to deal with, but they're pretty good. But right now, for as bad as we are, we're still the best. And but 30 years from now, I can't guarantee that's going to be the case if we don't change, because we will have real competition and we will lose sometimes. Okay, everyone wants to be exhausted. Yes, sir. One more. Sorry. Good.
Sorry, I have a quick question.
Sure, of course.
So you quoted many famous presidents, including James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. But in my mind, there's one president who really had entrepreneurs in mind, because his famous inspirational quote was, "Success is defined as going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm." And that quote, of course, came from Abraham Lincoln. But my real question to you is, how long do you think silicon will last? And when do you think we'll transition to carbon-based materials and germanium-based materials and graphene, of course?
How much what will last?
How long do you think silicon will last?
Silicon?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, relative to Abraham Lincoln, I didn't go into that because that wasn't part of the innovation story. I mean, he dealt with a whole different set of problems, and unfortunately, he didn't have time to deal with innovation matters. And so that's the end there. In terms of silicon, you know, God made almost the perfect electric material when he made silicon. The only thing I would tweak was to change the dielectric constant of silicon dioxide. So, other than that, it's pretty damn good for the practical stuff we do. Now, at the fringe stuff, like the super high frequencies and other things, other materials are clearly better. But for the massive things we do, there will not be a competitor to silicon. There isn't another material that has the proper attributes. And germanium, you know, is dead. It's only good for some very special things. The compound semiconductors are incredibly expensive and dangerous to make, and all of that sort of stuff. The only hope I'm going to get this graphene idea it will not replace silicon, but what it will do is complement silicon and be applied in areas where the super high performance is absolutely critical. And that's where I think it will ultimately materialize.
I have one question. While we're waiting for a great leader, that can take us through whatever change, what is, in your opinion, the leverage that entrepreneurs can put on our policies and the public leverage to change the status quo right now, outside of just begging for money to start our innovation?
You know, we live in a republic, okay? A republic is a form of government where representatives go to Washington and represent us. If you get the wrong people there, you're in trouble. That's in a republic like ours, the only thing I can say that makes a difference is elect the right people.
You mentioned yourself that we mustn't depend on government and we make our own fortune. So I guess at this point, as a take of entrepreneurial thinking, is to find out innovation and bring some form of leverage.
No,
Because
but you got to understand where we started. The notion when we created the Congress the way it's set up today was that a member of your community would voluntarily give up 2 years of their life to go to Washington and be a representative representing the people. The notion wasn't this would be a lifetime job. The notion wasn't that all of them had to be lawyers. It was people who mirrored the values of their local community. That was the idea. We have corrupted that idea over the centuries, but it always still gets back to send the right person to Washington. It makes all the difference in the world. I mean, I don't know how else you can do it. The other thing that has troubled me equally as much is the press. The press no longer reports things; they try to sell you stuff, and I really think it's really terrible. When I was a young man, I used to read the New York Times. It was the best paper ever. Now it's a bunch of trash. It's you know, you can hardly believe anything you read in there anymore because it's so full of untruths and false facts that you can't get. That's hurting us, by the way, an enormous amount. I don't know how to change it. Hopefully, the internet revolution will help change that. People look at things more on the internet than they do in the newspapers. You know, are declining. Maybe there'll be an opportunity for the right kind of thinkers to find a way to reach the people through the internet, and I hope that's the case. But the fundamental issue is it's not exciting, but just send the right person to Congress.
We'll take one last question.
I have a microphone.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There you go.
Thank you. We're very interesting. But as we all work with computers, and for someone who's been so close to what shaped our computer landscape, I want to zoom you back in your decision to stop the Copeland-Gershwin operating system of Apple, which was for people who don't know, the multitasking operating Windows killer system, which you stopped and then went into a licensing situation. And I'm really surprised by you, well, then it was for me in the news, but now you stress innovation. And wasn't the operating system part of the core innovation from your perspective then? Now it's easy to say. But what led you to stop it? Of course, fail fast, took a long time to fail. And can you think in your wildest dream, how would the world look if you were able to license the BOS, French software company, operating system you tried to license, and not have acquired Next and so on?
No, first of all, I'm absolutely positive I made the best choice that was available to me at the time in picking the Next OS. I also felt that I actually was part of the group that designed at a very high level what the Macintosh version of that operating system looked like. We call that Project Rhapsody in those days, but basically it was Mac OS 10, the beginnings of Mac OS 10. And I was critical. It was important to me that we put in some attributes in an operating system that would increase this stability. The problem with Mac OS 7, 8, and even 9. 8 and 9 were better because we used the Copeland Finder in that, and that made a really big difference. But it didn't solve the fundamental problem. You could not isolate in memory one activity from another activity necessarily, as you can in System 10. So, and unfortunately, that was also true of B. Well, B was very well done and very clever, but it would have had the same fundamental problem over the long haul. I really believe that the building on a Unix foundation was really exactly the right thing to do, and I think the integration of the Mac way of thinking about creating an operating system, you know, the user experience, putting that on a very well-designed platform, kernel, that Avi Tavanian had put together, was, I think, humbly saying, a brilliant, innovative step that has proven to be, over the long haul, absolutely the best thing you could have done. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank Gil, and we have a small present. Thank you. He's come all the way down.